Wonderful. Well, thank you, Alexis, and good morning, good afternoon, everybody. We are beginning another webinar. This is a part of the Institute of the Americas Energy Webinar Series, our 2015 Energy Webinar Series, and we're delighted to be able to continue to talk about Mexico. Several folks online probably were with us a couple of weeks ago when we had Undersecretary Cesar Hernandez, the Electricity Undersecretary, talking specifically about renewables, but also a little bit about the new energy sector reforms and what it means for the electric sector. Today, and we are delighted to be able to host Dr. Lourdes Melgar. And as a matter of fact, she just yesterday celebrated 1 year as the Undersecretary for Hydrocarbons, so we'll have to congratulate her when she comes online for getting through her first year as Undersecretary of Hydrocarbons, and what a first year it's been. The idea here is, obviously, we're talking about round one specifically, or generally, and specifically we want to talk about the 14 blocks, the shallow water blocks. We want to talk about some of the issues that continue to swirl around those blocks and the offers that have been, the convocatoria that's been put out on offer by the Mexican government. What is going on with the contracts? There's a process of review and discussion on the contracts, so we've asked Dr. Melgar to bring us up to date on the contract discussions and where the contracts stand vis-a-vis the first 14 blocks on offer, the timeline for those blocks. And we also were very interested in, and look forward to Dr. Melgar. We've asked her to go beyond just the 14 shallow water blocks and some of the longer term projections and objectives that we all are very familiar with that the Mexican government set forth in terms of the amount of investment, the timelines for investment, the 500,000 barrel oil gains, and what that means for future rounds this year. Obviously, the oil price environment is something that's at the top of everyone's list of a key factor that is going to have to be managed. There's been some press. Juan Carlos Cepeda has talked a little bit about postponing, moving down the list of offers, the non-conventional, some of the expected shale rounds. So hopefully we'll talk a little bit about not just that, but rather the future onshore rounds, the deep water rounds, and what those are looking like. And so we're very delighted to have Dr. Melgar update us on all that's going on. And so I think we are waiting for the presentation to arrive. So let me just see if we've gotten that yet real quickly. Alexis, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Lourdes is just connecting. I'm going to put her
Wonderful.
online, and perhaps she can start speaking while I get the presentation uploaded. That'll just take a couple
Perfect.
of
I didn't want to keep rambling if we had Lourdes online. Well, let me formally introduce Lourdes Melgar. She, as I mentioned, just yesterday celebrated 1 year as the Undersecretary of Hydrocarbons. She started when the Peña Nieto government took office in December of 2012. She was named Undersecretary of Electricity, and Lourdes served in that post until February last year when she was switched to oversee the hydrocarbons Undersecretary at SENER. She was at SENER previously. She was the Director General for International Affairs, and I'm sure many folks who dialed in today know Lourdes when she was Director General for International Affairs at SENER. And she's also worked in academia at Tec de Monterrey at the Agave Business School, and has studied, did both her undergraduate and graduate work in the state of Massachusetts at Mount Holyoke and then at MIT. So I assume she's a Red Sox fan, which is beyond all the other great stuff she does. It's the most important thing in my book. But Lourdes, I hope we've been able to get you online here. And without a whole lot further ado, I would like to turn the microphone over to you. And I don't know how much of my rambling introduction you picked up, but thanks so much for your time this morning and for your your ability to update us on all that's going on.
Good morning, Jeremy. Thank you very much for the invitation and for the opportunity to speak to you and to your audience.
Well, thank you. Thanks for your time.
Does everybody, do you have the presentation?
I'm just uploading it right now, Lourdes. So if you'd like to start, and I'll put it on the screen as soon as it's uploaded.
Okay, because if you allow me, I'll get started, so that we can have some time for a conversation afterwards for question and answers. But basically, I'm going to give you a brief update about where we are in terms of the implementation of round one. And first, I would like just to recall why Mexico had to undertake energy reform. And of course, there was a commitment from our president that he made during the presidential campaign to lower electricity rates. But also we had a major challenge in the oil and gas area where, despite increased investment in E&P, Mexico's production had been declining. And just to give you some numbers, we lost 1 million barrels a day between 2004 and 2014, when our production was around 2.4 million barrels a day. So the idea of this reform is to be able to boost benefits for Mexico's. Could you? I'm sorry, I don't have the presentation in front of me, or at least the presentation I have is not the one you should have. Hold on 1 second, please. The presentation you have, so I don't know what presentation was sent to you. So let me just begin by recalling some of the key principles of the Mexico's energy reform. And the first one is that hydrocarbons in the subsoil belong to the state, and this is something that was and is fundamental to Mexican society. And for this reason, our reform stresses that that it is the state which will be developing these resources in two different ways. One is through contracts, and the other one is to assignments that are given to Pemex or to any other state productive enterprise. Let me just go rapidly over some of these key principles, which are on slide number 3. And so the second principle is which I believe is a key in terms of transforming our model, is that it is a model based on the free market access and direct and fair competition among state-owned enterprises and the private companies. Of course, moving to this type of model entails strengthening our regulatory bodies. And for this reason, we transform from the Constitution both CNH and CRE, CNH being the National Hydrocarbons Commission, which oversees E&P activities, and CRE, which is the Energy Regulatory Commission, which oversees the activities in the electricity sector, as well as the mid and downstream in hydrocarbons. Also, as part of this strengthening of regulatory bodies, we reorganized our agencies, and we created both SENACE, which is the ISO for natural gas, the ISO for electricity, and SENAGAS, which is the ISO for natural gas. Our reform has as a key component transparency and accountability, and when I present you the bidding process, you will see it more fully how we are actually implementing these concepts. And also sustainability and environmental protection. Sustainability here is understood not only in terms of environmental protection, but also from a social and human rights point of view. And for this reason, you can see both in the hydrocarbons law and in the electricity law that there is a strong social component. And in terms of hydrocarbons, we created the National Agency for the industrial safety and environmental protection for hydrocarbon sector. Now it's known as ASEA, which will be entering into full force on March 2nd, and which reports to the Minister of, to the Secretary of the Environment. And finally, the last but not least, as I would say, is maximizing the state's revenue for the nation's long-term development. And this, in terms of doing this, we created the National Petroleum Fund for Stabilization and Development, which is the one that will be administering the state revenues that come from oil and gas development. So let me go to rapidly over the next slide. And in this regard, I basically would like to point out that there are two ways in which the state can develop its resources. One is through the entitlements awarded to Pemex in round 0. And in this regard, I like to recall that Pemex was granted 83% of Mexico's 2P reserves and 21% of its prospective resources. This gives Pemex a baseline for maintaining a production of 2.5 million barrels a day over the next 20 years and a half. And then we have the contracts. And from the Constitution, we established different types of contracts that will be awarded through a bidding process. We have license contracts, we have production sharing contracts, profit sharing contracts, and we kept the service contracts as well. Here, the important point is that it is these contracts are awarded through a bidding process. There is no one-on-one negotiation, and the contracts are signed by CNH. In these contracts, in this bidding process, we can see the participation of the state productive enterprise, or that is of Pemex, or we can see the participation of national or international oil companies. So let me go to the next slide, which is the slide number 6, and rapidly explain how our bidding process works. First of all, at no stage do we have a single person making all the decisions. We establish a process of checks and balances in which we have the participation of different agencies. In this regard, CENER, which is the Secretariat of Energy, selects the areas that will be put in the bidding round. We do this with the technical support of CNH, which, as I said, is the National Hydrocarbons Commission. Then CENER makes the design of the contract. We define what are the pre-qualification requirements, the type of contract that we will be using, and all the technical elements with the exception of the fiscal terms. It is the Secretariat of Finance that defines the fiscal terms. Also, we define the guidelines for the bidding process, and we give them to CNH so they can actually draft the terms and conditions for the bidding process. Once CNH has the whole package, that is the terms and conditions and the contract, then they can open up the data room and start, present them and start the bidding process. So, for instance, on December 11th, we presented the terms and conditions and model contract for 14 exploration areas in shallow waters. And CNH opened up the data room on January 15th, and we will be doing the bidding and awarding the contract on July 15th of this year. During the operation of the contract, it is CNH that will be doing all the administration of the contract. They do the technical approvals of exploration and development plans, they authorize the well drillings, and they manage the contract. And at this stage, of course, there are different agencies that also intervene, such as ASEA, which makes sure that all the activities are conducted following industrial safety standards, and they do all the regulation and oversight in this regard. And then we have the Department of Commerce, our Secretariat of Economy, that oversees the fulfillment of local content requirements. And of course, Hacienda has a very important role in making sure that, in overviewing the fiscal compliance of the contract. And finally, the Mexican Petroleum Fund will be in charge of making the payments to the contract and managing the state-owned revenues, with the exception of taxes which are paid directly to the SAT. Now, on slide number 7, you can see the first approach to round 1, which is what we presented on August 13th of last year. This is what we call the first approach because as we move along, we have been making some adjustments, and I will explain some of them shortly. In the next slide, you can see the first sequence. Well, let me go back one minute. Let me go back 1 minute. What you can see in slide number 7 is that round 1 presents a lot of diversity in terms of geology. We have areas that are in shallow waters. We have areas in deep water. We have some very interesting blocks in the Perdido area. We have areas of unconventional resources, both in the northern part of Mexico and in the Tampico-Misantla area. We have areas in Chicontepec, and we have also mature fields. So there is a lot of diversity, and for this reason we conduct this round through different sequences. So the first sequence has to do with exploratory blocks in shallow waters, as you can see in slide number 8. And what we presented are 14 blocks that have that cover an area between 116 and 500 square kilometers. And these are areas for exploration. You can see these are the ones that you see in dark blue. What you see in red are areas that currently belong to Pemex, that were awarded to Pemex in round 0. And then what you see in orange, is the blocks that we have in shallow waters, which will be either the ones that are in the northern part, near the red Pemex areas. These are fields that have extra heavy crudes. And then the ones that you have further south are some of the fields that we will be presented in the second bid at the end of this month. So let me go to the next slide. And in the next slide, what you can see is that for these initial 14 exploration blocks, we selected them. First of all, they're in the area where there is a lot of activity right now. This is an area where Pemex has been very active. We're talking of the area near Cantarell and Kumalopsab. And so this is really an area where we know there is oil and gas. Also, where there has been a lot of seismic activity. As you can see in this map, there has been a lot of 2D and 3D seismic. And as you can see in the next slide, this is an area also where there is quite a bit of infrastructure. And what is interesting about the infrastructure that we have here is that it has spare capacity, as this is the key area where there has been a decline in production over the past decade. So in terms of this first bid, for these first 14 exploratory blocks, we selected a production sharing contract, as you can see in slide number 11. This type of contracts is widely known to the industry. It's used in a lot of countries. And we selected this type of contract because we have quite a bit of information about the cost of exploration and extraction, as well as the technology that is used in shallow waters. As I mentioned, this is an area where Pemex has been very active. And this contract is designed to protect the interest of the state without reducing the investors' interest, without reducing their incentives to participate. In this model, the state will receive the hydrocarbons production as part of it to pay for the exploration and production cost, as well as a reasonable return for the contractor as determined in the bidding process. Let me stress this. The bidding process, the variable for the bidding process is an economic variable in which the key component is the government take, the percentage that will go to the state. And the contractor will carry out exploration and extraction activities at its own risk and will begin to receive payment only as it gets in the production stage. There is a lot of detail in some of the slides that I have here, so I will go rapidly over them. You can read them in wider detail since this will be shared with all the participants. First of all, I'd like to point out that companies can participate either individually or as part of the consortia, as you can see in slide number 12. And the important thing, and what I already mentioned it a couple of times, is that these contracts will be awarded through a public international bidding process and signed by the state through CNH. Now, an important point is that all these will be seen, and you will be able to follow it through internet. This will be done in a public act. There is a lot of really, I think it's really unique in our case that we have a lot of transparency. I mean, in other parts of the world, contracts are awarded through some kind of negotiation, and here we have a international bidding process that can be followed through internet. Anybody who wants to get, for instance, the terms and conditions or the contract can download them from internet, and they will be able to follow all the responses through internet to questions through internet, and the day of the bidding process will be transmitted through internet as well. I like to point out also that the fiscal and economic terms include an adjustment mechanism in order to capture the oil rent. And this adjustment mechanism is particularly relevant as we are mostly aware of the volatility of the international oil market. This adjustment mechanism is useful because it allows the state to capture oil rent as oil prices go up, and also if, for instance, the field is extremely productive, there is a mechanisms to ensure that the state gets the oil rent. Also, we establish in the contract the minimum percentage for local content, and in this specific contract we start with a 13% in the exploration phase, which will go up from 25 to 35% in the extraction phase. And it establishes obligations regarding industrial safety and environmental protection. And I already mentioned this, we have unprecedented transparency rules. The contract that we presented in December is a 25-year contract, which has a 2 5-year extension. So we're talking of a contract that has a lifetime of about 35 years. It establishes a minimum work commitment, and we expect that as a result of this bidding, we will see at least 26 exploratory wells within the next 36 months in this area. We also establish relinquishment rules, and as well as a rent per square kilometer of the exploration area to ensure that there is no idleness in the exploratory phase. The pre-qualification requirements, I like to mention that in defining the pre-qualification requirements, we thought about some of the key elements that we wanted to make sure we could achieve. One of them is in this stage, in this area, in shallow waters, we want to make sure that we can increase production fast and that we can also restitute reserves fast. And we wanted to make sure that all the activities conducted in a very safe way, that the industrial safety component of the activity is really underlined because we're talking of the Gulf of Mexico and we want to prevent any kind of accident. So we ask to have an operator who can demonstrate that they have experience in the period between 2010 and 2014, that at least they have been an operator in one offshore project, or that they have been a partner in two offshore projects in the past 5 years. And they have to demonstrate that they have key personnel in key management positions who have at least 10-year experience in E&P offshore. We have also requirements related to financial capabilities, and as well as some rules that are meant to trigger competition. For instance, no company may take part in more than one consortium. We cannot have a consortia formed by two large-scale oil companies, that is, companies that produce more than 1.6 million barrels a day, or companies or consortium may submit bids only for 5 contractual areas. So what we're trying to achieve here is to have wide participation from different players. And to wrap up, I would like to mention that in December we presented this first invitation to bid, these first terms and conditions and model contract for 14 exploration areas in shallow waters. In February we will be presenting the extraction fields in shallow waters as well. And then we will be moving along the calendar. In March we will be presenting the onshore fields. Then we will go through Chicontepec on conventionals, and we will finish the round in deep water. I like to mention that we are making some adjustments to this calendar, and we will be officially presenting this calendar with the adjustments by the end of this month. Also, for information, I like to mention that the data room opened up on January 15th, and we have already 38 companies that have expressed interest in this first bidding process. 26 of which have requested access to the data room. 22 have already been approved to participate in the process. I have some other slides related to other aspects of the energy reform that have to do with the mid and downstream, but I would like to stop here and be open to your questions, and if you want me to address some issues related to opportunities in mid and downstream, I'll be very happy to do so.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lourdes. And let's definitely get into some questions. We really appreciate that presentation. And apologies, it was a very large file. It took a little while to get uploaded, but I think we got it. And as you mentioned, and as Alexis posted online there, we'll send out a copy of that, a PDF copy of all the slides to everyone, so you can look at them with more time and leisurely. Lourdes, there's a lot of questions. Let me throw one out to start the conversation. Finalization of the contract. There's a couple of different questions that we've been receiving. Can you talk a little bit about the process for finalizing the contract? I know it's underway, the discussions. What's the timeline and what's the disposition of the government to make adjustments to what appeared as the contract?
Okay, I appreciate very much your question. What we presented in December is sort of a first draft. It is industry practice to receive comments and make adjustments if they are considered to be necessary. So right now we are at a stage where we are accepting and welcoming the comments from industry. CNH does that through its web page. CNH has a very tight requirements in terms of not allowing participants in the bidding process to meet with the commissioners or with members of with the staff of the commission. So they only can receive comments through the internet page. I know this is something that some companies do not like, but that's the rule that we establish in terms of transparency. So CNH cannot meet on a one-to-one or have meetings with industry. However, the Secretariat of Energy can, and we have been meeting with representatives from industry who have addressed their concerns or make some suggestions and comments. And currently we are in the process of basically gathering all the comments and analyzing them. We will be presenting a second draft of this contract probably in March. I don't have a specific date yet, but it will be in March, with the idea of getting comments. And thus far, the terms and conditions establish that we will be publishing the final draft of the terms and conditions and of the contract 1 month prior to the bidding taking place. That is June 15th. We've heard from industry that some consider that date is a little bit too tight, so we will be evaluating whether we move and present the final draft earlier. But we are basically, the message is we are open to comments. And also the second thing I would like to say is that the contract that we will be presenting in February will not be different, or will not differ significantly from what we already presented. And this has to do with the fact that we are just in the process of getting comments from industry. So we didn't want to start making adjustments to a contract that we know it has to be quite similar, because we're talking of a contract for the same area, which is shallow waters.
Thank you. No, so the second draft you said will be in March. Let me ask you. You said it'd be very similar to the first draft. There's a couple other. I'll sort of summarize a couple of questions here. Will there be any changes over the next months to some of the very ambitious drilling and investment targets and objectives that you laid out? I think you said 26 wells in 36 months. Obviously, there's a fiscal term element, but also sort of the work calendar. I don't know if you can comment anything more on the work calendar side.
Sure. Let me just clarify a point, Jeremy. I said let me try to phrase it more clearly. We presented the first contract for exploration blocks in shallow waters in December, and this is the one that we will be making adjustments to in March. Now in February we're going to present the contract for extraction in shallow waters, for extraction fields in shallow waters. Now this contract will be quite similar to the one we presented in December, because eventually we will make adjustments to the two contracts, okay? To contract number 1 and number 2, we will make adjustments that have to be quite similar. Am I being clear?
No, that's perfect. Absolutely. I think that's a wonderful precision and adds a lot of clarity. Yes, thank you.
It's important, because I wouldn't want to send a message that there will be just mild changes. I don't know if it will be mild changes or significant changes, but in any event, what we present in March will be what we think takes into account some of the concerns and some of the comments that we've received from industry, and most importantly, in some cases, some of the comments that we have received have to do with clarifying what we mean, or some of the drafting. So we will be working on that. To go back about your second question, I think your question had to do with the calendar, and what I mentioned is you have a calendar in the presentation. And as we speak, we are making adjustments to this calendar. I didn't want to send a different calendar just because it would be quite confusing if every week we come up with something different. We're making adjustments as we speak, which have to do with different considerations. One is, first, we're coming out in February with the contracts for shallow waters, for extraction in shallow waters. And then we think it's very important that in March we come out with a contract for onshore opportunities. And we're talking primarily about mature fields. So we are putting mature fields in our third bidding round. And then we will decide, and this is one thing that we are evaluating right now, whether we are making adjustments to Chicontepec and unconventionals, which is indeed the area where we see that current price conditions could have a major impact.
Thank you. I want to let's stay with that point because there's several questions here that have indeed said the new environment of low prices, and there's summarizing a variety of questions here. Is there anything more you can add as to what the impact on the future bidding will be? I think there was some comments in the press about Juan Carlos Cepeda saying that the unconventional will be delayed. It sounds like you mentioned there will be a new calendar released by the end of the month. So anything more you can add in terms of what acreage, what may be changed? There's an idea of some things being offered only the best of the best in terms of unconventional. There's a lot of pieces to this question. It's a very wide-ranging question, but anything you can add in terms of that point?
Sure. No, I know this is a difficult question to answer because I think at times we have not quite been successful at conveying the message. But what we mean is, let me go back one step. When we presented our first approach to round one in August, we selected areas and we knew that we needed to do a deeper analysis. So for instance, let's take shallow waters, exploratory blocks in shallow waters. If you look at the initial proposal, we had presented 11 blocks. But if you look at what we ended up putting in the first bid, we are putting 14 blocks. In reality, it's the same areas, but as we analyze the materiality of them and we run the fiscal terms and all of that, we decided that it made more sense to divide some of these blocks, and in order to ensure more activity and also in order to ensure greater returns for the state. So for each area that we have, for each opportunity that we are putting in the bidding process, we are doing this analysis. And it's not something that you can do simply. I mean, this is something where CNH has to do a lot of technical work, geological work, etc., to review the blocks, and then we have to run them through the fiscal terms and see what makes most sense. So at each stage we are advancing. Right now we are finishing up the contract for extraction fields in shallow waters, and then we will start doing this exercise for onshore. So when we look at onshore, also we have to add the analysis of the social impact evaluation, which is an important component of our reform. So we need to be able to match areas where conditions are best in every regard, where there are no environmental concerns, for instance, where the social conditions are favorable for the development of the project, and where we have interesting resources. And that's sort of what we're doing, and we will be doing that. But of course, if you look at what we put out for Chicontepec and unconventional, it's a really big area. Originally, we put a huge area. So what we are doing is precisely what you mentioned. We're looking at it and selecting what is most interesting, particularly taking into account current conditions.
Perfect. There was a question here I want to get to that you talked about the social impact. And I think this is, and thanks for the clarifications there, changing the conversation a little bit, but there's a question I posted on the screen from somebody who's working on the issues of social impact, and they'd like to know where they can find the guidelines for new mandatory social impact evaluations, and basically understand a little bit better what the reform spells out in this regard.
Well, thank you for the question. We have, you can find some elements in our webpage, in CENER's webpage, which is www.cener.gov.mx, and also in the laws, you can read what the law says. But right now we're working precisely on the guidelines. We know we need to produce these guidelines before the bidding process takes place onshore, and so over the next over the next few months, we'll be producing several documents that we will still need to have all the regulatory and all the requirements that are needed for all these activities.
Great, thank you. Let me, if you don't mind, there's another question that has a little bit to do with sort of the new framework, the new government in Mexican framework for oversight and management. And you talked earlier a little bit about how CNH is managing responses and the transparency, the data rooms. Can you talk a little bit more about how industry has an opportunity to offer common input, especially when it comes to ASEA and the Environmental Safety Organization?
Your question is how they can give comments?
Yeah, there's a question here about, you talked a lot about how to provide feedback to CNH, but what about when ASEA develops their role, and how does feedback work?
Okay, I appreciate the question because it allows me to clarify an issue. All the comments related to the terms and conditions and the contract and everything that has to do with this, you can load it up in the page of CNH. There is a specific page, www.rondauno.gov.mx, which you can find at the end of the presentation. And you can go into this page and then you can give comments there. What CNH does is that they will be directing the comments to the specific agency that has to address this, and we will have there will be a committee that will be also reviewing the questions to make sure that the appropriate agency is the one that is responding. ASEA will be, as I mentioned, it's already created. It already has a director, but it will be having its full will be in full activity as of March 2nd.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. And that presentation will go out so people can find the exact page that you referred to. Let's talk, there's several other questions. I want to go to a couple. One has to do with education, because I think this is something that a lot of folks are thinking about, and it's talking about the human capital element, let's call it, and the requirements that are now more critical than ever in Mexico in terms of the energy sector. And by unleashing this amount of investment and new opportunities. So the question here is Mexico suited educationally to meet the demand of Mexico's energy reform? So take a second, if you would, and just talk a little bit about the human capital element vis-a-vis the reform.
Okay. Well, we know that human capital requirements in the energy sector are a challenge everywhere in the world. I think what we have done from the start is that as we moved along in the definition of the energy reform, we also developed the mechanisms to be able to create or develop the human capital that we need to meet this challenge. And in this regard, CENER, CEP, which is our education secretariat, and CONACYT, developed a program for providing education, providing scholarships at the technical college and graduate level to train the skilled people that we need to enter into this industry.
Okay, excellent.
So we have a program and we're investing in it, and not only that, but also, for instance, we have signed agreements with different universities, not only in Mexico but outside of Mexico as well, and with institutions such as the French Petroleum Institute. And what they're doing is they're helping us train and retrain people here in Mexico. For instance, engineers that specialize in different types of engineering that now want to become, for instance, oil engineers. They're getting the training they need to be able to become one rapidly.
And you made I would have to jump in and also say that SUNAIR has signed an agreement with the University of California that will allow for several Mexican, I think it's 2,000 by next year, students to come and study master's degrees and PhDs at the University of California system. So we're delighted, and we hope to get somebody here at the Institute of the Americas, by the way, this summer as part of that program. So there is a lot, you mentioned some of them, but there's a lot, I think, underway. Obviously, it's a huge issue, so we'll keep on top of that. I know you've got to run in a couple minutes, Lourdes, but there's a question here I think is important because it gets into some of the specific elements of round one, not just the shallow water blocks, and we spent a lot of time talking about the precisions for that first contract, but if you could go a little bit further and talk about contract terms for some of the future convocatorias as part of round one. The specific question is regarding, will there be anything beside PSAs used for future offerings?
Okay, as I mentioned, the Constitution allows for licenses, PSAs, profit sharing agreements, and other type of agreements. Concessions are banned. That's a very important point. Concessions are not allowed in Mexico. We do have discussions about coming out with some license contracts as well in this first round. We haven't made the decision yet, but it's a consideration that we have on the table.
Okay, thank you. Let me ask you. I'm going through a long list of questions here, but let me try and summarize a few of them here, because I think there's a lot of questions. You know, we have, as you mentioned, the different offerings that go throughout the year. A lot of comments on the restrictions that have been put in place for the 14 blocks in the shallow water tender, and summarizing the comments and some of the questions I'm getting. Can you explain what those restrictions mean, not so much for the shallow water blocks, but more importantly for future contract bidding in round one? And so in other words, I think there's one slide was very clear about the restrictions for the shallow water blocks. But will those be the same restrictions on future blocks?
I appreciate very much the question because it gives me the opportunity to clarify that these are restrictions that are specific for shallow waters. These will not apply for other type of fields. For instance, we all know that in deep waters you usually have consortia that are formed by 3 or 4 major companies. So it would not make sense to have a restriction such as the one that we have in shallow waters. These restrictions really were meant to foster competition in shallow waters and to make sure that we didn't have just one big player that got all the blocks. So this is what's behind it. And but we are quite aware that these rules are not meant for every type of geology or every type of area.
That's perfect. I think that's something people are really have. I would say in talking to people, that's one of the largest doubts that persist in minds is, what does this mean for future offerings? So thanks for that clarification. Notice there was a few slides left. Did you want to go through those, or do you want to just leave those for folks to look at when we distribute the presentation?
Well, it all depends. I mean, we usually end up talking a lot about EMP, and that's what seems to be the where most interest is. And I think particularly now under current oil prices, and also because it is a significant part of the implementation work that we will be doing this year, I like to take just a couple of minutes to mention what the new model is for the mid and the downstream. And I think this is an area for investors of great opportunity in Mexico, because what our model did is that, as I mentioned, in E&P, which is still a strategic area of the state, it is the state through a bidding process that gets, contracts, signs the contracts with the company that does the activity. But in the mid and the downstream, it is completely open up for competition. And you can do it on your own, or if you want, you can do it jointly with Pemex. But it's not, you don't have to do it with Pemex. That's something that you can decide. And so, just to mention rapidly, and you have the slides on slide 17, you can see that the new model for oil refined products basically allows for, through acquiring a permit, to be in the refining or in the natural gas treatment or in the oil products import and export business. Also, we have a gradual liberalization of gasoline in the diesel market, and we aim to have a competitive market by 2018, where not only will we have the open up imports, but also where the prices will be set by market conditions. And I think this is significant. It's an important change, because we should recall that Mexico imports half the gasoline it consumes. So, if we think about it, there is an opportunity to invest in refineries, and there is an opportunity to invest in the retail sale of gasolines, as well as on the pipelines that are needed to move these products around. And then finally, to mention that we have a new natural gas model. This is really a very important part of our energy reform and of the implementation that we are conducting right now. Before, we used to have just one player, which was Pemex, and now we have different players, because first of all, we created an independent gas system operator, which is Senagas, which also Pemex had to transfer its pipelines to Senagas. And Senagas really is in charge of making sure that we have a competitive market with open access to all producers or to all retailers. And we have a program, a very important program, to develop the infrastructure that we need. So under this administration, we are expecting investments in the order of $13 billion in the development of gas pipelines. And CFE, the national utility, opened up an area for trading natural gas, and they've become very successful at leasing, conducting bidding processes for pipelines. They are really helping develop the infrastructure so that we go from a very skinny pipeline infrastructure that we have to a robust system that covers most of the country. And I would leave it at that, and thank you very much for the opportunity.
Yeah, and thank you, Lourdes. Thanks for sharing those last. It's very important. I mean, you're right. There's so much emphasis on the upstream in round one and the contract model, but thanks for those changes to mid and downstream. If you have time, I just wanted to ask you for some final comments. And as you make some final comments, let me summarize a few of the questions that I keep receiving. One of them has to do with the data and the seismic, and how the obtention of that from Pemex is going. And there's somebody said that they've heard Pemex is keeping some data that's been obtained in the last 3 years. So if you could offer some clarifications on the obtention of the data that will be used and as well as what the plans are for future data acquisition and seismic this year. That would be wonderful. And then there was several questions about where does heavy oil fit in. So I know that's a lot, but I'll offer you the opportunity to make some final remarks, and if you could cover those 2 points, we'd be delighted. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Jeremy. Let me rapidly mention something that I forgot to mention as I spoke about opportunities in the mid and downstream, which is also that petrochemical industry is open up to private investment, and that since we are developing and making sure that Mexico has enough natural gas, there is a really interesting opportunity for developing a very competitive business in petrochemicals and sort of regaining the leadership that we used to have a few decades ago. Regarding heavy crudes, thank you for the question. Yeah, I saw that we don't have it in the calendar. Of course, we will be including heavy crudes. We're in the process of defining the date at which we will be coming out with that bidding process. And an important part also that I didn't mention is that there will be the farm outs of Pemex. And what we think it's important, and this is something particularly relevant for heavy crudes, is that we would like to do that in parallel, to bid in parallel the farm outs of Pemex as well as what we have in round one. I would like to recall that in the Mexican case, the farm out of Pemex has to be conducted through a bidding process as well, due to the fact that these were entitlements that were awarded to Pemex in round one. As long as there is no bidding process, Pemex cannot do cannot do just the bidding farm out as any other company would. Once they have gone through a bidding process, they can do it as any other company. So that's an important difference in the model that Mexico has. And then regarding the data room, I would like to mention that there has been full cooperation from Pemex, and that the CNH has expressed its gratitude because they feel that they have gotten full support and that they have gotten really good information. And I'm not quite the one to judge, because I think this is really for technical and industry people. But what I have heard, the feedback that we've gotten from industry, from companies that have already entered the data room, is that this is really an outstanding data room.
No, I think I've heard that as well. So congratulations to your colleagues, of course, you all are as well. And look, Lourdes, I know you have to go. I want to thank you for your time today and your disposition to attend to so many of these questions. Apologies to the folks who posted questions that we didn't get to. We're out of time, but I think we covered a lot of ground in a short period of time. And Lourdes, I hope to see you in person again soon. I want to congratulate you. I don't know if you're on the line yet. You celebrated 1 year as Undersecretary of Hydrocarbons yesterday. Congratulations.
That's right. Thank you very much, Jeremy, and thank you very much for the invitation. See you soon.
Take care. Thank you, and we will get this. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, just want to say thank you, and everybody have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. We will get this out to everybody later today. Thank you for joining us for the Energy Webinar Series here. The Institute of the Americas. On your screen are some upcoming events we have next week in the Dominican Republic, Argentina, a little bit of discussion on electricity in Mexico. So thank you, everyone, for your time. We appreciate your participation. We'll see you in person or online again soon. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful weekend.